Right, good afternoon all. Sorry about that, especially to any members of the public that are on. My name is Terry Richardson, Chairman of the Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to this today's meeting of the committee, which is being held online due to the current situation. The meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and for those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I please ask that all officers and members mute their microphone until they wish or are invited to speak. When you are speaking, please turn your video on. In fact, for most of you, it's probably easier to keep it on all the time, I would have thought. I will now go around the members and ask them to introduce themselves. We do have two substitutes today. Unfortunately, Councillor Broadley and Councillor Harrison are unable to make it, but we do have two substitutes who interview themselves as we go around. So could I first start with Mr. Mullaney?
Hello, Councillor Mullaney, present.
Right, then I have Councillor Crooks.
Councillor Crooks, present.
Councillor Gillard.
Councillor Tony Gillard, present, Chairman.
I have Councillor Coxon is substituting for Councillor Harrison. John, are you there? Can't see that John's on the call at the moment. So I'll move on. Councillor Mear?
Yeah, Councillor Mear here, present, thank you.
Councillor Poland?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor James Poland, Syston Foss. I can see and hear in the proceedings.
Councillor Amanda Wright?
Yes, Councillor Wright, present.
Yeah, can you please remember to put your video on when you speak, Amanda, please?
Yes.
And Councillor Maggie Wright?
Yes, Councillor Maggie Wright, Stony Stanton and Croft Division, present.
Right, thank you. Have we heard anything from Councillor Cox at all? Does anyone know?
I've not heard. I've tried to join him, but without success, unfortunately.
He's been on 2 previous meetings today, so we know he's fully aware of it. Anyway, we've also, sorry, excuse me, Chair. We've also got Mukesh from Health Watch, just to make you aware. Sorry, Mukesh.
Good afternoon, Mukesh Barrott, Chief Officer for Health Watch Leicester and Health Watch Leicester, sir.
Right, and as we're going around, we might as well get Councillor Blunt to introduce himself.
Afternoon, everybody. It's Richard Blunt. I'm portfolio holder for adult social care.
And Councillor Radford. You're on mute, Christine.
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted myself. Councillor Christine Radford, counter support for Richard Blunt. Thank you.
Right, I'm sure the meeting will now only get better. So we move on to agenda item 1, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of November. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd November are taken as read, confirmed and signed. All in favour? Any dissenters? Right, now move on to agenda item 2, question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I have received no questions from members. Agenda item 4, to advise are any other items which the Chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. I have not been notified of any urgent items. Agenda item 5, are there any declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda? No, right, thank you. Agenda item 6, declarations of the party whip in accordance with Overview and Scrutiny Procedure Rule 16. I have no declarations from the whip. Agenda item 7, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35. No petitions have been received. We will now move on to the main agenda items. As with all the following items, can I please ask members to allow officers to present their full report before asking questions? To indicate that you have a question. I'm on my own computer. So somebody from the council just phoned to say, am I in? To indicate that you have a question, please use the raise hand function and unmute your microphone, and I'll call upon you one at a time. To be sure everyone has their say, I will finalise by calling all members to ask if you have anything further to add. So we will now move on to the first item on today's agenda. Is the Adult and Communities Medium-Term Financial Strategy 2021 to 22. From 2021-22 to 2024-25, as set out on pages 11 to 34 of the agenda pack. Members should have received a separate document regarding the process suggested for dealing with the budget proposals. We will discuss each section in turn, and there will then be an opportunity for members to ask questions on that particular area of the report. Can I welcome to the meeting the Cabinet Lead Member and the Director of Adult and Communities. We also have present Judith Spence from Corporate Resources, who is here to assist in answering questions. I will now invite the Director and Lead Member to briefly introduce the report before we scrutinise the proposals as per the process set out on the paper that has been circulated. So over to you, please, John.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, I'll take the report in sections and we'll pause after each section just to check whether there are any questions from members. It's quite a complicated report, so it's probably best done this way. The first section is from paragraphs 5 through to 9, and this just sets out the context within which we're looking at the MTFS today in relation to the Adults and Communities Department. So the context is largely based around the Delivering Wellbeing and Opportunity in Leicestershire strategy, which Cabinet signed off in 2020. It's the new strategy for the department to cover us through this MTFS period. Paragraph 6 lists the main drivers of the strategy. And as it says in paragraph 9, the growth and savings and the MTFS reflect the demand for services and the transformation of the department based upon those strategic aims. So I'll just pause there just to see if there's any questions on the strategy. I think you may be on mute, Chair.
Chair, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, apologies. I'm having no end of problems with the mic. Before I call you in, Mr. Mayor, could I see that Councillor Coxon has managed to join us. So can I ask Councillor Coxon to introduce himself? Are you having problems with the sound, John? I think John's having the same microphone problems that I had. We'll come back to you, John. Councillor Meir.
Thank you, Chair. Just on at the right at the beginning, I just wanted to ask, as this is an MTFS over a set period and a set number of years, what's the council tax increase that we've allowed for each year? Because I think ANC is or adult social care is allowed a precept. Is that in each of the 4 years, or is that in a particular year? Can we get that answered at the beginning? Is that okay?
I think Nick Wash might be best placed to answer this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. The MTFS as it's presented has been laid out on the basis of a 2% council tax increase per year. And there's currently a consultation that's, well, it's just finished actually. It finished as of yesterday on the council tax for this year. The adult social care precept, we are able to raise an additional 3%, which can be either all for 21-22, all for 22-23, or spread over those 2 years. as yet, a decision hasn't been made on the basis of that, and obviously the results of the consultation that have just been finalised will go into making that decision. But the figures that have been presented at the moment have been based on a sort of 2% underlying increase per year.
Chair, just to comment on that one, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Just to say, actually, if we haven't made a decision on the adult social care precept, and we're looking at these figures at the 2%, shouldn't there have been a comparison to say, actually, if we'd taken a 3% precept this year or a 6% precept the next year, the figures would be different, because obviously the council is entitled to levy that precept. I'm not saying that it should or shouldn't, but it's entitled to. And if it did so, there would be an increase in amount. So if we're looking at this MTFS today on a 2%, it could totally be different by the time we look at it at our budget meeting in February for full council. So I'm not sure we will do it justice.
I think the point is, Mr. Mayor, is that obviously council can't put anything on there until council has voted for it, which happens at the budget meeting. Now, the budget is still the budget for adults and communities. What we're talking about is how that budget is funded. Now, the council is, as you say, allowed to levy up to 2% this year for normal increase in council tax, should it decide to, and up to 3%, which it can use either this year, next year, or over 2 years. Now, the simple fact is that were the council to levy that 3%, that will just put additional money in the budget, which will be spread across all departments. Whilst it is ring fenced for adults and communities and will be used there, some of the money which adults and communities are taking from the central budget can be released back to that central budget. So it has no material impact on the budget we're discussing or how it's to be utilised. What we're looking at is how it is funded and what the overall funding gap of the council might be if it is not taken.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask the director, and he may delegate it to somebody else, how much would that extra 3% raise if it was brought to this meeting? How much would that figure be? He may want to refer back to last year when we raised it.
Thanks. I'll defer to Nick, because Nick will be able to give you the numbers. But I'll also just say in the next section, I'll try and cover off the conversation that we're just having in relation to the MTFS as it's laid out. So I'll refer to inflation when we get into the next section as well. Nick, you might want to answer the question about how much 1%, 2% or 3% of council tax raises.
Yes, I can, John, and through you, Chair. It's an additional, each 1% would raise roughly 3.1 million additional amount. So the 3%, obviously, if we took the full 3%, that would be another 9.4 million for next year.
Nick, thank you very much. Chair, I'll leave it there, but I would just want to point out that £9.3 million when we're looking at this budget isn't an insignificant amount, but I will leave it there. Thank you.
I totally agree. It's not insignificant, but it's not relevant to this budget in that respect. You're assuming that this budget will be adjusted by an extra 9 million. This budget could release that 9 million back to the other areas of the council should the council decide to take the 3% for adults and communities. What we're looking at is what adults and communities got and how it funds, and you can't look at this without looking at the totality of the whole council's budget, if that makes sense to you. But we'll move on. Back to you, John, for we have Councillor Coxon.
Oh, sorry, Chairman, I've been trying to get on since the meeting started, so I'm a bit behind, but apologies for that, but I am here now, Chairman.
Thank you, John. I had exactly the same problem with the link, so I've had to come in a different route.
Yeah,
but,
I'm on the phone at the moment too, so rather than through the computer.
I can see if you could lower your hand, and if Nick Wash could lower his hand as well, I'd be great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, John, for paragraphs 10 to 13 and Appendix A, which are on pages 12 to 13 and pages 27 to 28.
Thank you, Chair. So paragraphs 10 through to 13 detail a summary position of the budget through the MTFS period 21, 22 to 24, 25. As you will see at paragraph 10, whilst there is a provisional proposed net budget which raises from 151 million through to 156 million over the period, what you won't see in there is the price inflation. So the price inflation is added through a central contingency and is in addition to the figures that we have here. And that, to some degree, speaks to the point that Councillor Meir raised, in that whilst there is a £5 million worth of additional growth, when you net off savings from growth, there's an additional £5 million of growth in there. In addition to that, on each year of the MTFS, there will be a price inflation levied, which, as it details in the report for last year, was around £6 million just for the single year. So you can see that the budget will build up over the course of that MTFS period, probably in excess of 20 million, which will account for £0.7 million. We receive an income of 98.6 million. There are internal transfers on the budget for 21-22 of 8.3 million. So that gives us a net figure of 151.4. And the way that money is then spent is outlined in the table at paragraph 12. So I'll pause again there, Chair.
Thank you, John. I've got no hands up on this one that I can see, unless I've missed someone, in which case please shout at me. So on that basis, John, we move on to growth, which is paragraph 17 to 24, which is pages 15 and 16, and the G7 to G11 comments in Appendix B, which is on page 29. Thank you.
Okay, so the growth is outlined in these paragraphs. Overall growth over the MTFS period over the next 4 years amounts to £13 million. That £13 million is made up of demand-led pressures in different service areas. The first service area is older people, and you can see that over the 4 years, the growth in this area goes from £2 million in 21-22 up to £8 million in 24-25. Older adults is the area of the budget that accounts for the majority of expenditure, and the majority of people who use social care services are older adults. The increase in demand pressures results from an increasing number of people using services. And that's again obviously based on the demographic changes that we're anticipating over the period. It's also due to the cost of services. So the average cost of care is increasing, and particularly with older adults, the average care package size is increasing. So people are presenting now with higher levels of need, higher levels of acuity, which requires an increase in the amount of care that they require, but also increases in the cost of care. Within this section, there is also a commentary around income. So, as we said earlier, we receive a large amount of income on the social care budgets, particularly. An amount of that income comes from individual charges for services. And there is some uncertainty as to the income levels due to the COVID pandemic. And there's also a little bit of uncertainty in terms of NHS income, which has been fluctuating through the course of the last 12 months and will probably continue to fluctuate over the course of the next 12 months due to the pandemic and the individual service costs and grant allocations that we receive in respect to that. Paragraph 21 then goes on to detail the demand pressures in learning disability services. £500,000 in the next financial year, rising to 2.2 million in 24-25, largely down to increases in the new people coming into the service, transitioning from children and family services, and through additional costs of high cost packages, and particularly in relation to people who are currently in NHS accommodation, inpatient accommodation who will be transferring into the community over that period, and social care will then pick up some of the care packages and the cost of those care packages. And they're what's called the transforming care client group, and that's a substantial impact on budgets. 22 and 23, similarly for mental health and for physical disability demand, smaller amounts, as you can see, smaller client groups, but they still have a significant impact in terms of costs to the department. Paragraph 24 is a new growth area this year, being added to the budget, and this is a growth area in relation to staffing costs. The department has had to establish a market premium particularly to social work posts due to recruitment and retention difficulties in those posts. So I'm happy to take any comments on those areas.
Thank you, John. The first person is Councillor Mear.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to raise a point on G9, which is regarding the mental health. Point 22, I think paragraph 22. I think it's a welcome provision. I think if anything, COVID's highlighted isolation and people feeling lonely. And it's great that we're recognising that and that we're putting some money towards it. £350,000 isn't a huge amount, but it's something. But it's rising to 1.5 million, hopefully over the course of the MTFS, and I think that's something that we should focus on. We focus on the care homes, we focus on adult social care in its totality, but we don't sometimes look at the details. And I think this is one of the details where, as COVID progresses and people are in isolation for longer, it is something that we need to focus on. But also the one paragraph below it, the number 24, trying to recruit and retain social workers, because that's how I read it as well, how it's been explained. The market seems to have moved, and we maybe have to pay more to keep and retain. Can John give us what the vacancy ratio is there, and how hard and how difficult it is to retain people? Because obviously, if it's forever a circle, we probably need to look at this on a wider, broader term rather than just a one-off fix every year.
John?
Yes, certainly. As you said, recruitment and retention of social workers is particularly difficult at the moment. It's not exclusively social workers, but social workers are, as you know, a mainstay of the department. And it's not something that is just an issue for Leicestershire. So this is an issue nationally in terms of social work availability. We currently have a number of vacancies in our social work posts. Just in learning disability services alone, we've got 15 vacant posts. We've recently tried to recruit. We've been out to advert. We've been through an interview process, and I think we were able to recruit one post. So that gives you an indication of the difficulties that we face. The market premium is obviously subject to review. We do review it every year, but we are, I think, of the opinion that it will be required at least for the next 12 months and possibly beyond. But again, we will review it. But it is just something that we have to keep under review, because social work and social workers are at a premium at the moment, and particularly those more experienced social workers or those with post-qualification experience.
Thank you, John. Do you wish to come back, Mr. Mayor?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maggie Wright.
Hello, John. It was regarding point 21 and the trend really of the growing need in children's services and working its way into adults. And you said really that it would be a substantial impact on the budget going forward. And I know it's a difficult question, but what provision can we make for that, or have we made, or, you know, just your opinions on that, please, or your views?
Yes, I mean, the number of people that come through from children's services, to a degree, it's a known figure. So obviously we know the numbers of people that with disabilities that children's services are working with. They're not exclusively working with children's services. There'll be people who children's services might not be working with that will also come through transition. But we do know more or less who those people are. We can forecast some of those costs based on what we know about them and what the future may be in store for them. We do work with families and with young people to try and promote their independence wherever possible. So that is one mitigation. So we can work with people to become more independent over time. There are obviously some services which are provided to young people whilst they are in children's services, which they may not be eligible for once they become adults, because the legislation between children and adults is different. And what we need to provide for people as adults is somewhat different to what you would provide for a child. So that again mitigates some of that demand. We are working with children's services, and particularly with the new programme that's in children's services, to design the future of children's services and define the future of children's services. And we're working with colleagues to look at transitions and to ensure that we are working with people from a much earlier age and with families from a much earlier age to promote that sort of independent lifestyle, which will give people a better outcome in terms of the quality of their life, but also potentially reduce the burden on public services. So all that work is continuing, but of course we do need to make sure that we do have full provision for those people when they come through into adult services.
Thank you, John. Councillor Wright, do you wish to come back?
No, thank you, John. That's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're now moving on. I see no further hands raised. We're now moving on to savings, adult social care, which is paragraphs 25 to 36 and AC1 to AC10 in Appendix C. The first bit is on pages 16 to 19 and the appendix is on page 31. Back to you, John.
Thank you. So yes, the overall savings for the department over the course of the MTFS amount to around about 8.1 million. The first of those, paragraph 26, is an increase in income. This is one that we have in every year, and it's related to changes to benefits and pension provisions, which mean that as a department we can increase the amount that we ask people to contribute to their services as their income levels go up. The next one is the social care investment plan, where we're looking to reduce the revenue costs through investment of capital to provide for alternative accommodation for people, and that reduces the revenue cost in the longer term. The next one is increased Better Care Fund income. I'll come on to the Better Care Fund later on the report, but we are anticipating that we can increase that income by around £500,000, and that's really due to the fact that the NHS will receive a larger annual uplift than inflation, and therefore the amount that they pass to us as part of the Get Better Care Fund will increase. The next one, paragraph 29, is goes back to the target operating model, and as you know, and I think at the last meeting of the committee, we brought forward the final report of the target operating model work, but there is an ongoing dividend from that work. So in the last financial year, in the savings for the last financial year, we have, or for this financial year we're in now, we have £5 million, but that figure could rise up to £9 million over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. So we've put in some additional savings over the course of this MTFS as that money starts to work its way through. Paragraph 30 is a new area, new to this MTFS, which is the implementation of digital assistive technology, known as CareTech, and a report is being presented to Cabinet in February to seek approval for an investor save proposal, which we anticipate could bring forward around £2 million, at least £2 million over the course of the next 4 years, by utilising care technology to improve people's independence. Paragraph 32 is an ongoing saving that we've had in for the last few years. It's about reviewing the cost of placements and reviewing the way that care is provided to people in high cost placements to look at where we can become more efficient. Paragraph 33 is another new area to the MTFS. So establishment review. Essentially what this is reviewing our current staffing and our management to ensure that we are reflecting the outcomes of the target operating model work, to make sure that we've learned from COVID and to make sure that we're in the right place to implement the new strategy. So as we implement a new strategic intent, we need to make sure we've got the staff in the right place to deliver the services to that intent. And we're looking to do that review, but also to make some efficiencies along the route. Paragraph 34 is another new one. So this is around digital self-serve. And it talks about financial assessments, but it won't be just limited to financial assessments. This is trying to make the department more accessible to the public and to people who use services through digital means. And it's sort of bringing the department up into the 21st century in terms of how people access services, how people access care, and the control that people have over their care services. Paragraph 35, review of mental health pathway. So this goes back to some of the questions that Councillor Meir had earlier around mental health care. We think there are far too many people in long-term care with mental health needs. We know that there is a growing demand for mental health care, and we want to develop a service that enables people to be supported at home for longer. And in doing that, we think we can also make savings to the cost of care. Paragraph 36, transitions, and again, as we've already discussed, part of the Defining Children's Services for the Future programme will focus on young people transitioning into adults. And as part of that work that's been taken forward within children's services, there is likely to be a financial dividend for adult services in the longer term. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. I see no hands raised. I'd perhaps just like to make a couple of observations. I appreciate we're looking at the budget, and that means you look at the cold figures. But I would particularly refer to paragraph 29, which talks about the target operating model, where I do think that, as we've discussed many times at this committee, we provided a better service and saved money. And I also very much welcome para 30, because again, whilst there might be a saving, this is not about saving money. This is about providing better services. If there is a knock-on impact of providing those better services in a different way and we save money, we all benefit from it. But I think, as we've seen from your comments on the growth of the budget overall, were we not to have done some of these things, we would have been looking at finding probably an extra 9 to 12 million to support this budget overall, if you look at the ongoing impact of just the target operating model alone. But I now see Mr. Meir has got his hand raised. Over to you, Joel.
Thank you, Chair. Just on back of what you've said, actually, on the target operating model, it is a substantial amount of money that we've saved on services that we're providing in a different way. With the establishment review, unfortunately, the way I read it, sometimes it means that certain people may not lose their jobs, but may be shuffled over to a different career path. But what I want to know is we're saving £9 million, I think the director just said. If we're saving that much money, we want to make sure that nobody's falling through the cracks. So are we going to review how this target operating model has been effective, or how effective it's been, maybe say next year or the year after? Is that something we're going to do? Because I would hate that in 2 years or 3 years' time we have a report that says actually X segment of everybody we try to help actually didn't benefit from the target operating model. Thank you.
John?
Yes, so I'll answer the last question first, if I may. So in terms of the target operating model, within the department, obviously we review it on a monthly basis. We have a performance review every month. We also have some additional external review So although the work with Newton Europe has now come to an end, we do have Newton Europe come back, I think, another twice to undertake a sort of a mini review with us to make sure that it is being embedded properly. We can certainly bring back a report through to committee in a year's time to report back on sort of the medium term outcome, if that's helpful. I'd certainly be very happy to do that. In terms of the sort of the former points that you raised, Chair, around AC24, AC4 and AC5, and I would say also in relation to AC9, the review of the mental health pathway, which is another one of those areas where we're looking to make efficiencies by doing the right thing. So in all of those cases, it is a case that what we're looking to do is work with people to promote their independence, to give them more control of their care, and by doing so, to reduce the costs to the department. So absolutely, whenever, I mean, you will forgive me, given that this is a financial report, I am focusing on the finances today. But certainly in all of those cases, the underlying principle is that you improve people's services, and by doing that, you also become more efficient as a department. So that's sort of the underpinning principle behind all of those areas.
Thank you for that, John. I think that's the point I was getting across, that this was never about saving money. Saving money is a benefit because it does benefit people in with council services, but it was always about doing the right thing. Is that an old hand, Mr. Mayor, or a new one? Oh, thank you. Right, in the absence of any further questions, we're now moving on to savings, communities and wellbeing, which is paragraph 37 on page 19, and AC11 in Appendix C on page 31. Back to you, John.
Thank you. This is a very brief one. AC11, as you said, the community and wellbeing services. The savings within this MTFS is largely based upon work that was completed in the last 12 months to review the staffing establishments and to fully implement those changes. And then there will be some further efficiencies found by reducing operating costs throughout the life of the 4 years, amounting to £140,000 in total.
Right, thank you, John. I think that was so brief, no one's put their hand up or in fact had time. So I don't think you've got any questions on that one. So we're now moving on to savings under development, which is paragraphs 38 to 43, pages 19 to 20. Back to you, John.
Thank you. So this goes back to the social care investment plan. That's the only area that we've got on the savings under development on this MTFS report. So this is essentially to look at where else we can make those same level or further savings by considering how we use capital to benefit revenue spend. We are undertaking further work in this area. We do want to, so far we've really concentrated on supported living and on bringing forward supported living schemes for people who are in existing people who are in residential care. We do also want to look at the provision of extra care and the provision of residential care services, and to look at whether or not we can be more efficient and reduce costs by bringing forward those sorts of developments, much larger developments, which will take much longer to come through into the MTFS, but have potentially a bigger benefit on the revenue budget. So we're doing some work at the moment just to scope that work and to undertake some business cases around that, to see whether or not that's something that we want to bring forward into the next MTFS.
Thank you, John. Again, I see no hands up. I would comment again, whilst it's in the budget and there's no money there, I find this particularly exciting of looking to find the right accommodation. My residents benefit by having an extra care facility just outside my division, which I think has made a massive difference to people's lives. I know residents who've lived there and how they've benefited, and there is a knock-on impact back to the council. They're living better, they're living healthier, and there's less cost to the council. But the what I've seen of the benefit to those residents far outweighs those base financial figures, and I think is something exciting. I know something the committee will continue to look forward to reviewing with you about how we can best deliver this across the whole of Leicestershire. So again, it's it's in black and white because it has to be, because it's the budget. But again, I think there's some exciting bits in here which underpin it. We're now moving on to health and social care integration. This is paragraphs 44 to 49 on pages 20 and 22. John.
Thank you. I'll slightly skip through paragraphs 45 to 49, if I may, although I'm happy to answer questions on it. 45 to 49 just essentially give the history of the Better Care Fund. And then from paragraph 50 onwards, we've got some narrative about the current position of the Better Care Fund and the Better Care Fund throughout the life of this MTFS period. And as it states there, within paragraph 50, because of the pandemic and the pressures faced by health and care services, policy and guidance in this area has been delayed, and in fact we didn't actually get the policy statement for 2021, the current financial year, until just a few weeks ago. And we certainly haven't had anything through yet in terms of policy and guidance for 21, 22 and beyond. We are working on the assumption that the BCF will run for at least another 3 years. That has been sort of indicated, although we've not had anything in writing to that effect. And we are working on the assumption that the Better Care Fund will remain with at least the contributions that we currently have, although we do expect that there may be some changes over the course of the next 12 to 24 months, which might actually increase the contributions into the Better Care Fund to take account of some of the policy changes that have come about through the pandemic, and particularly in relation to things like discharge arrangements, for example. So we still continue to have to meet the statutory requirements, and we are doing so locally in Leicestershire. The actual sign-off, as it says there in paragraph 55, has been rather difficult this year, but we are now in a position where we can sign off this year's expenditure and look forward to next year's. Paragraph 56 details the amounts and allocations within the Better Care Fund. The CCG allocations, 41.4 million. The IBCF, the 3 IBCF totals are contributions that come directly to the local authority, but go into the Better Care Fund as our local authority contribution. And the Disabled Facilities Grant is the capital allocations that come through the County Council and are passported into the district and borough councils, which gives us a total of £62.9 million. As it says in paragraph 57, the 19 million of the CCG contribution is a minimum allocation that has to be spent on adult social care services. And in addition to that minimum allocation, within the Leicestershire Better Care Fund, there is a further £6 million worth of expenditure, which comes through the CCGs and is spent on adult social care. Clearly, any reduction to the funding would place a significant pressure. The BCF, that £19 million minimum allocation, is 12% of our total revenue spend, net spend. But with no indications at this point that there will be any reduction to that income over the course of this MTFS period.
Thank you, John. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to raise this later, but I'll raise it now because it's an interesting point there on the Disabled Facilities Grant. 2020-21, it's 4.4 million. But if you look further on, and which John will come to on the capital programme, for 21-22, it's 3.9 million. So has there been a reduction of what we're receiving from government on this?
Well, I may defer through to one of my finance colleagues to respond to this one, but my initial response would be there has been an increase in this financial year. An additional allocation was given for the Disabled Facilities Grant in year. So it could be that it's just that additional amount that's been given in year, but I'm happy to bring in Judith, who might be able to answer that question.
Judith, over to you.
Yeah, John's right. We had a significant amount more this financial year to passport, but we've gone back to what our average has been for the disabled grant for the next future years, trying to be a bit prudent. But if more comes in, obviously it will be allocated and transferred as appropriate.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, as chairman of the committee, I think the only thing that keeps me awake at night is what we get funded under the Better Care Fund. So I don't know if members of the public, if we've got any watching, just realise the pressures it puts on our officers in determining the budget and councillors in having to guess what future funding might look like and the importance of some of these streams. So if I could at this point thank the officers for what they've done on this, and how much effort they're putting into trying to find out what is likely to happen, what is likely to come, because it's so crucial to our residents going forward. And let us hope that during that period, John, we get some certainty and visibility of funding for perhaps a longer period of time, which would enable us to plan better. If we can now move on to, I don't think it's any, oh yeah, sorry, Mrs. Councillor Wright has a question. Councillor Maggie Wright.
Sorry, it was just following on actually from the disabled facilities grants and the interesting point that was raised, but it is a capital fund, and I know that it is difficult sometimes to spend the capital, and there are useful revenue streams that could be used to help people as well as the capital fund. And I was just wondering if there was any plans going forward from government to try and put a bit more flexibility on that grant.
Yes, it's a good point, actually, and it's something that we have raised with government, and I know that a number of the district councils have raised it as well, because it is limited, as you say, in terms of there are certain conditions attached to its expenditure. We would like to be able to spend more against what might be seen as revenue expenditure rather than capital. I think actually the additional amount that came in this year had more flexibilities. So I think the additional 500,000 that was allocated this year did have more flexibilities in that respect. So that might be an indication of where government's thinking. I don't know, but at the moment, yes, it is constrained by that capital kind of requirement.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. I'm going to be a bit radical now, as is allowed for the chairman, in that we have other external influences and other funding sources. There's only a paragraph for each. So could I suggest, John, that you do both together and then we'll ask questions on both rather than do them separately. So that's paragraph 60 and 61 on pages 22 and 23. Thank you, John.
Yes, by all means. So the other influences, the only two that we've kind of mentioned really are the impact of COVID, and clearly that is going to have a major impact, and it's not just in this financial year, that's going to continue at least into the next 12 months, if not beyond. Some of that uncertainty is due to the way that we're being funded for COVID. So as you're probably aware, we get bits of grants here and bits of grants there, and we got two announced just in the last couple of days, another two small pots of money. And therefore, there's, as you said already, really a lot of uncertainty when your funding is coming in dribs and drabs and bits and bats. And it's not a sustainable way to continue to fund social care. But also there's some uncertainty here, obviously, around things like demand for services and the nature of services, and the way that we will have to provide them going forward will be different to what we've done traditionally. And then the final point is related to that sort of funding issue. Government are still saying that they're committed to social care policy reform, but as yet there is no indication of when or they may bring forward any kind of white paper to that effect, and whether that will be in the next 12 months, we simply don't know. So we just noted those 2 points there. The other funding sources, we do get a number of other smaller grants which go toward the funding of adult social care. So we've got the Winter Pressures grant that's noted there. The former Independent Living Fund, we have a reducing amount that is paid to us each year to support those people who were formerly funded through the Independent Living Fund. Continuing health care, is again one of those areas that's been subject to a large amount of policy review over the last few years, but we do receive a significant amount of money through the NHS for people who have continuing healthcare needs. Then there are some smaller amounts for social care in prisons, advocacy, and then the pension scheme and some funding from the Adult Learning and Skills Funding Agency.
Right, thanks, John. And just before we go on to the capital programme, I might just invite the portfolio holder, Councillor Richard Blunt, just see if he has an overall comment he'd like to make on the budget so far.
I think, Chairman, you're just checking to make sure I'm still awake, aren't you?
I could personally comment.
I think when you listen to what we've just heard now, in all seriousness, it just shows how complex adult social care is. I don't think there'll be any other department at the county that involves so many different spheres, working with so many different inside and outside bodies. You know, I'm proud of everything we're doing. I think some of the savings we've seen coming through here, how we're making savings, how we're doing better outcomes, it's the sort of stuff I've said every time I've come to these meetings, Terry. But, you know, we're hearing them all again in summary. As you said earlier, it's the dry old figures we're dealing with, really. But actually what's equally important is the outcomes. And I'm still very proud indeed of the work we're doing. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you for that, Richard. We now move on to...
Can I just comment, Terry, that
yes.
I've been involved with how we're now supporting people to leave residential care and move into their own, units, and speaking to them. They think they're absolutely marvellous, giving them their independence. And it's something that, as a team, we're looking at moving forward. So I think we're going in the right way.
Thank you, Christine. We'll now move on to the final part of this report, which is the capital programme, which is paragraphs 62 to 63, A to B, page 23, and Appendix D on page 33. So on this report, John, back to you for last time. You're on mute, John.
I nearly got through the report, didn't I, without making that mistake. So the capital programme is traditionally quite small in adults and communities. We have a very large revenue spend, but generally speaking, a small capital spend compared to other departments. So the two areas that we've got on our capital programme for this MTFS, both items that came in last year. So we're in last year's MTFS, they're not new areas. First is the development of the Hamilton Court Smith Crescent site in northwest Leicestershire. So this was approved by Cabinet back in 2018, actually, to redevelop that site and look at developing additional supported living on that site. And we have been out to tender. We've had to go out to tender again, and we're just in the process now of coming to a determination about that development. And then the second one is, as we've already discussed, there is some capital allocation for the social care investment plan, which is left unspent. It's a previous allocation that came in last year, and it remains to be determined in terms of those business cases that we're bringing forward in terms of and how we spend that capital. So that's just the two areas there. In terms of the future developments, obviously we've had conversations previously around the collections and learning hub to consider the records office and the museums and heritage services. Those have been paused due to the pandemic. We'll come back to those, I think, in future years. There is the skip that we just talked about. And then there is this an area that we need to think about in terms of the digitalisation of adult social care. So we started to bring forward a couple of things in this MTFS in terms of revenue, the care tech and the digital assessments process. But obviously, when you start looking at things like digital technology, there will obviously be a capital requirement alongside potential revenue benefit. It's just the nature of the beast in terms of those sorts of digital processes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Again, I think there's no hands raised on this one. I know we discussed this briefly at the pre-briefing, and I'm quite excited about the steps forward that are taking place across the county in particularly dementia-friendly accommodation. I'm fortunate in my division that there are some dementia-friendly bungalows being built as we speak and in the near future. And I think there's a knock-on impact. Again, it's dry financial figures, but the benefit to those residents, to the carers that they have going, and the knock-on impact back on our budget, I don't think could be underestimated going forward. So I think, as you say, small pots, but they make major differences to people's lives. And I didn't want to let that pass without noting that you can do a lot with a relatively small amount if you use it properly. And I think that's what county has been doing very successfully, certainly since my time as a county councillor. So we've come to the end of that report. I think we've had comments that you can take away, but I think as you've seen from the comments and questions, that I think people are largely supportive of the budget that's been put forward, understand the rationale behind it, and would certainly commend the budget to Cabinet and to Council at the appropriate time, unless anyone disagrees with that. So thanks for that, John. We're now moving on to the overview of adult safeguarding activity pre and during COVID-19 pandemic, which is set out on pages 35 to 46 of the agenda pack. I think we've got John who's going to kick us off, and I think there's also Nigel Thomas and Tracy Ward available, who will also be available to answer any questions on specific issues. So back to you, John, to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. So I will just do a very brief introduction, and then I'll ask Tracy to take members through the report. This is a report that members asked for previously, to have a consideration of the impact of the pandemic on safeguarding activity across the county, and to ask us to bring forward a report which would consider any issues arising from the pandemic on our safeguarding activity. So we brought a report today which has got various aspects in it, in terms of practice, in terms of some data and some numbers, but also a specific focus on serious adult, safeguarding adult reviews, which is the process that we undertake should somebody sadly lose their life, or should an occurrence occur where it's potential loss of life and there is a safeguarding issue. So I'm going to ask Tracy if she will just take members through the report, focusing particularly on the local impact of COVID over the last 12 months.
Thank you, John. So in respect of data produced, there are 3 or 4 themes that are picked up on. So there are Tableau dashboards that report safeguarding information at a local level. There's data that was produced in respect of key activity by the Safeguarding Adults team, and then records of information held relating to SARS, as John has alluded to, but also some NHS digital information that was created at a national level. So in respect of the local picture, what we've seen is that there has been an increase in year to date of safeguarding adult alerts, and the report makes reference to what an alert is. So it's information that's received by the department where there's a concern for welfare or potentially safeguarding issues related to an individual. So you'll see at paragraph 20 of the report, that's been an increase from 3,098 to 3,880 year to date. And what we see, again, at the same paragraph, is trend data. So that's ongoing data that runs on a daily basis. The highest number of alerts that received was 3,578, or 74% of the alerts were sent to the safeguarding team. So members will be aware that the safeguarding team received referrals from the customer service centre, which is the first point of access to the department. And just to give some context, 59% of the current alerts were open for a period of less than 2 weeks. So we can see that work flows through the department on a fairly regular basis. So moving on to inquiries completed, again, year to date, there were 529 completed inquiries. That's it, in a position against 1920, where there were 703 completed inquiries. We'll see that for June, there were the highest number of completed inquiries, totaling 86, and the months May to August were the lowest at 44. What we also see in respect to paragraph 23 and the second chart is that we see a significant increase in safeguarding inquiries commenced during the month of December, and that equates to potentially a conversion rate of safeguarding alerts into inquiries rather than being concern for welfare that may be managed by our locality offices through case management. So moving on into the information relating to the safeguarding team, the safeguarding team report and record information in two ways. They are organisational safeguarding inquiries, so that's activity that's taken or occurs in a regulated activity, and then community cases. And we transitioned the safeguarding team in 2018 from potentially just managing the OSAs into managing community referrals as well. And what we see is the month-on-month cases received for both of those service areas, where the safeguarding team have closed the inquiry or the threshold was not met, and then the number of cases that are transferred to localities. So moving just on to issues relating to safeguarding adult reviews, it'd be fair to say that, as indicated in Table 35, that we've seen a significant increase in safeguarding adult referrals for the year 2021. A number of those safeguarding adult reviews are in progress, and John alluded to the reasons why we'd commence a safeguarding adult review. There's some information relating to the themes, patterns and trends related to those individuals, but one of the things that we do see is that there has been an impact, certainly during the COVID period, for people who may have disengaged from other services and increases in social isolation and the impact of drug and alcohol misuses on those people. So just in respect of Leicestershire and local level, you will see that in respect of information pertaining to what particular areas were being looked at, we were pretty much in line during previous years with the national reporting data relating to categories of neglect. What we have seen in the year to date is an increase in psychological abuse. So those are the key highlights that I wanted to bring to your attention. I'm happy to take any questions in respect of the report now, if that's okay.
Hi, Terry, you're on mute, I think.
There you are. We're all doing it today. That's the only problem with digital. Councillor Maggie Wright.
Thank you. It's just a basic question, really, I think, looking at all the data. How do you capture repeat alerts? So if it comes in and then it's closed and then it comes in and it closed, what's the trigger mechanism to saying, oh, I think there's a problem here, rather than losing it all in the stats?
So the information that we relate to a safeguarding inquiry would be captured in the adult social care management system. So we'd be able to look at previous safeguarding adult inquiries related to an individual. But what we also do is capture safeguarding inquiries at an organisation level. So if we had a care provider, what we would then do is look at the individual inquiries attached to that care provider. So we'd be able to look at themes, patterns and trends related to that. And what we also attempt to do is to have some triangulation of that information to our colleagues in the commissioning and quality team. So again, we can look at data that they receive around the provider performance or concern for welfare that we might receive, and look at, again, if we need to address that either at an individual level or at a contractual level.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Tracy. I think, the purpose of the committee asking for the report is not because we had any doubts that the work wasn't being undertaken, but I just think it's nice to see it evidenced and to evidence to our residents of just how much work we're doing in this area. So I think the reason you got such few questions is not because people aren't interested. I think it's the other side. It's nice to see it this way, and that it's been put in such a clear, concise way that it's covered our concerns and any questions we might have had, that this council is doing the right thing by its vulnerable residents. So thank you very much for that report.
Just one final thing, Mr. Chairperson. What I would say is that you would see, in respect to the safeguarding adult data managed by the safeguarding adult team, during the first national lockdown, there was a dip in the referrals that we received, but that's now in line with what we'd expect to see, just in respect of normal reporting of alerts.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Right, we're now moving on to the third agenda item, which is, he says, hopefully, the commissioning and procurement of the home care service, which is in your agenda packs on pages 47 to 56. Again, I think John's kicking off, but I think we've got Nigel Thomas, Tracy Ward, David Stanton and Jill Newton are also available should anyone have any very tricky or difficult questions that John doesn't want to take on. So back to you, John.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't want any tricky or difficult questions. Thank you. I'm just going to introduce the report briefly. We brought a report through to committee this time last year, possibly in December 2019, ahead of a report that then went to the County Council's Cabinet to seek approval for to procure home care services for the next 5 years. That approval was granted, but then subsequently, of course, we had the pandemic, and a decision was taken and approved by Cabinet last year, in June of last year, to defer the procurement for at least 12 months due to the requirements of the pandemic and the need for us all to focus on that. We didn't want to be sidelined by a procurement process. So we're now in the process of bringing through that procurement. We do have, unfortunately, a requirement to re-procure the services ahead of November of this year when the current contracts run out. So we're not in a position to be able to defer the procurement any further. And so this report is just to update members on the current position and also to alert members to some considerations that are now being considered in relation to the procurement. So I'll ask Nigel to take members through the detail of the report.
Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everybody. So John's covered the background, which is paragraphs 4 to 7, as a reminder to where we are at the moment. Paragraphs 12 to 15, just there as a reminder to members of the committee of when this last went through the governance cycle, the proposed model of home care and pricing models following that piece of independent analysis that took place from Care Analytics last year. And that is, as the position as we were, was that we had the provider model would take two forms of provider, a prime provider who'd be expected to pick up the majority of packages of care in their appointed zones, and then they would then be appointed at fixed hourly zone rates and enhancements with packages of care allocated via a brokerage team on a priority basis, and then a supplementary provider who would be offering packages of care that couldn't be placed within the prime providers except in the rural free zone of that zoning, which is detailed in the report, where no prime provider role would exist. I'll return to that in a short while, because that's the main area where we think we're going to consider a potential amendment to that. Paragraphs 20 to 25 just summarise the impact of COVID and market risks. So since March last year, there's been increases in demand for home care from individuals. And this has seen home care weekly starts increase by about 70% during the summer. And although these have since reduced, they're still 20% higher at the end of last year than they were in the previous March. So overall, there's been a 25% increase in the number of people receiving home care as of 1st of December compared with the 1st of March, and a 14% increase in the average number of hours being delivered to each individual. The trends of new packages of care in recent months have demonstrated the resilience of the local home care market, despite the ongoing risk of community spread of infections. And if we look at their workforce, for example, that's remained relatively stable, with no huge spikes over a period of time. So it's testament, I think, to the resilience of those providers that's been managed to be sustained. In terms of retaining and building workforce capacity, there's been a positive response to the authority's social care recruitment campaigns, although the longer term impact and sustainability of those campaigns is yet to be assessed. And the emerging home care specification, particularly going back to rates of infection, will reflect the importance of infection control in the events of incidents such as the current pandemic. And those are set out in a health and safety section of what will be the emerging specification. And that's received impact from specialist nurse managers for infection prevention and control in the drafting of the spec. So moving on to paragraphs 27 to 37, this really outlines what the next steps are in the pre-procurement following the pause. We've re-engaged with Care Analytics as an independent organisation, and demand modelling is being reviewed prior to the re-procurement of the contract, just to consider whether there are any additional factors to consider following the COVID response and the renewed lockdown period. And aligned with this, the Care Analytics analysis of care volumes, the prime provider model, zoning and pricing approach are being reviewed now, and we're expecting the outcomes of that later on over the next week. And this is followed by further market engagement to test the revised price benchmarks with current and potential providers prior to the publication of any invitation to tender. So as part of this, the report just highlights a possible change that we are considering, and that is, rather than specifying a prime and secondary provider model, there's an option to tender for an open framework consisting of any providers that meet our quality standards and can demonstrate their willingness and competence to deliver care in specified areas of the county. So the rationale for this is that the potential change to the model is that by offering all packages of care via the county council brokers, prime and supplementary providers will naturally emerge based on levels of business that they are able to deliver. And I think we've seen this in practice over the last months, and particularly due to COVID. This would remove the need for providers to bid as particular provider types, which might act as a deterrent in other instances for some providers to bid. The removal of any unnecessary artificial barriers would help small, medium and larger term care agencies doing business with us. And we're hoping that might be something that is a result of this. The potential drawbacks of the prime provider model is that monopolies of support can develop in areas, and where one or two providers are given first refusal on care packages, it may be that more attractive care packages are taken first by prime providers, leaving less attractive work for supplementary businesses. Opening up that market to any willing provider who meets the quality standards could incentivise local provision and allow new market entrants through the lifetime of the contract, and encourage small and medium enterprise providers. The potential benefits of a prime provider model are that, as things were originally set out, was that the authority would have a lesser transactional cost and resource, whilst providers would be able to invest in the workforce development due to certainty of business and for economies of scale. Now, in theory, this might also bring reduced pricing. However, given that the hourly rates are intrinsically linked to staff pay rates, which are largely based on national living wage rates, this might not be achievable in actual practice. So what we've done is ask Care Analytics to look at this possible change and to see what impact that might have. But that aside, it's not envisaged that if we did choose to have a more open framework, it wouldn't alter the lots or the pricing model proposals. We're not envisaging that would change. At the time of writing this report, we've gone through the additional COVID-19 restrictions, and those are in place at the moment. So we'll be needing to look at the impact of those, along with any other emerging information from the work being undertaken by Care Analytics. And if necessary, you've got some indicative timeframes in the report in paragraph 39. We will we may potentially look at reframing those milestones. But obviously, as John said, it's essential that we continue to aim for a completion of the transition in advance of the November deadline. So that's the report. I'm happy, obviously, to take any questions, and colleagues as well are here who are close to this piece of work.
Thank you, Nigel. Councillor Maggie Wright.
Thank you, Nigel. You mentioned about the open framework, and if you go for this process, how small an organisation can actually be considered for it? Because I know in very rural areas and that you may get somebody setting up a very small business of 1 or 2 or 3 people, but they may be ideal for that very rural outreach location. I just wondered what was precluded.
Well, obviously, before I'll pass this on to perhaps Tracy, who's been involved in this quite closely, and Jill. Obviously, anybody bidding for the work would have to meet what we set out in the invitation to tender. So they will have to ensure that they meet certain specifications. But whether or not that puts a limit on the size, I don't know whether Tracy can pick that one up.
No, I think I'd concur with what Nigel said. It is about being able to meet the method statements and being able to demonstrate things like financial stability, quality of service delivery. But historically, as a local authority, I've been involved in the procurement of domiciliary care for a number of years. And I think we've had different models over different periods of time. And I think what we need to do is to be able to have a range of providers of differing sizes delivering quality services across the whole of the county. That's the key driver for us to make sure that we're supporting people in their local communities to live independently.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mia.
Thank you, Chair. I was just waiting for the mute button to come off. I don't think I've been as long as some other people on here, but I have been here long enough to know the help to live at home when we went to primary providers and split the county up into certain areas. And now we seem to be rowing back to small providers or any providers in any given area. And I don't know which way the right way or the wrong way is. And I think if you look at it, the model didn't work with help to live at home. I think one provider withdrew from the market, and we had to support a lot of our residents in that respect. But I'm willing to give this one a chance, because I think the way things are going with COVID-19 and the pandemic, more people are looking to have care at home where they feel more safe and more secure. And I think small niche providers, like Mrs. Wright has said, can spring up, especially in rural areas. In towns such as Loughborough, we probably have a dearth of supplies, actually, but in the rural areas, hard to reach areas, there probably isn't. And small enterprise coming up, small business coming up, it's to be encouraged. But there is that barrier of entry, isn't there? There is a cost to coming in, the qualifications and all the rest of it, that they have to meet the thresholds that they have to meet. And I think we may have to encourage and support that, especially if we don't want the big boys, as they say, to take all the business. or the big girls to take all the business. But I'm willing to have it a go, and we've learnt the lessons, I think, from Help to Live at Home. I've read this document, and apart from the pricing structure, which I've asked in the pre-meeting, I'm happy about that. I think it's workable and it's doable. And I think in 2 years or 3 years' time, when we review this again, I don't think we'll be having the same conversations that we had previously. Cheers, thank you.
John, you want to come in? You've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to add to the point around the sort of the small companies or those that might not meet the requirements of the specification, because there are some requirements in there that can be quite difficult for very small, you know, one if you've got 1 or 2 people or a very small company, things like, you know, public liability insurances or other things that they may struggle with, because we do obviously ask for quite a lot of safeguards in that respect. But what I would say is that even if they don't meet that specification, we would very much like to speak to them, because we also want to encourage what we, in jargon terms, call micro enterprises. So, you know, there are opportunities for very small 1s and 2s and 3s people who want to deliver care to local residents, and we can work with them and support them to be able to do that particularly through a direct payments process. So even if the person can't get a contract with the county council and meet all the requirements of a county council contract, there may be other ways that we can support them to deliver care, and we'd very much like to speak to them about that.
Is that an old hand, Joe, or do you want to come back? Thank you for that. Thank you, John. Just one observation I'd like to make at the earlier meeting, just to put members' minds at rest, is that we had a conversation about the assessment that we make as a council on providers of infection control techniques. And whilst it's not in the report, John did advise us that it is in the tendering process, and it is one of the key things that the council looks at when tendering contracts, which I think hopefully will put residents and their families, if they're listening's mind at rest, that we are living in particularly trying times where infection control is probably more important than ever, and that this council places a higher priority on it, and ensuring it's done and ensuring that we support those businesses. I'd also like to commend really the portfolio holder as well, and the team that, you know, they are prepared to look at what works right in the circumstances we find ourselves in. You know, there's nothing wrong with changing a model or adjusting a model. I know what's most important to our portfolio holder, from what you said earlier, is, you know, I don't really care what system we got, as long as it's the best one we can have and the right system to meet the right time. So whether or not we move back or we go sideways, I think is a strength, not a weakness of this council, because at the end of it, it means we're putting our residents at the heart of everything we do. So I'd like to thank, on behalf of the committee, the officers and the portfolio holder for actually making sure that we put everything on the table to be looked at again. And I think we are, as Councillor Mears says, supportive of the report, and looking forward to getting this in place as soon as possible. So thank you all on that one. We now move on to the final agenda item, which is a national performance benchmarking 2019-20 and performance report 2020-21, position as at November 2020, as set out on pages 59 to 76. And I think John's having a well-earned rest, and we're going over to Matt Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the introduction there to the report. As with previous performance reports brought to the January committee meetings, there are two aspects to the one today. Firstly, it provides national benchmarking of performance during the previous year, in this case 2019-20, and is based on data published just last month by NHS Digital. Secondly, and perhaps the more traditional element of the report, is an update of the more recent performance. In today's report, this covers the period April to November 2020. And just to make a point with regards COVID-19, this has had obviously a considerable impact on reporting of activity and performance in the current year. However, as we will see, the benchmarking of 2019-20 is unaffected. So I'll start with the benchmarking aspect of the report, and the comparative information comes from a few different publications. Firstly, adult social care. This comes from the Adult Social Care Outcomes Framework and is often shortened to ASCOF. There were 24 metrics in the ASCOF in 2019-20, which is 5 fewer than the previous year, as it was not a year for the inclusion of the biennial carers survey. Overall, the position was not too dissimilar to 2018-19, although the proportion of metrics in the top 2 quartiles fell slightly from 48% in the previous year down to 42%. Supporting people to gain or regain independence remains a strong area of performance. The proportion of people living at home following reablement is above the national average, also the average of the 10 East Midland authorities and also the Shire Council's average. Furthermore, the proportion with no need for an ongoing service following a reablement service was in the top 25% nationally. That's in the top quartile. So the top quartile, and again, higher than the East Midlands and the Shire averages. Other areas of good performance included the low numbers of people admitted to permanent care, in particular those aged 18 to 64. Furthermore, the low level of delayed transfers of care, with a few attributable to adult social care, meaning performance was amongst the top 25% of authorities in the country. It's clear that feedback gathered via the Service User Survey does remain a challenging area of performance, and a third of the metrics in the ASCOF are sourced from this survey. 7 of these 8 metrics were below the national average. The 8th metric, which is around about services that people find helpful to keep them safe, this was higher than the national average and just short of the top quartile. As noted in the report, service user feedback will now be collated at all planned service reviews. In October of last year, the Care Quality Commission published their annual report, The State of Healthcare and Adult Social Care in England. This gives information on the quality of care provided. In Leicestershire, 86% of community providers were rated as good or outstanding, similar to the 87% nationally. The equivalent figure in Leicestershire for residential providers was 80%, whilst it was 83% on average in England. The final aspect in the benchmarking section of the report is library services. Based on the SIPFA analysis of libraries activity, performance in Leicestershire tends to be lower for more traditional aspects of the service. A shift to e-loans and strategic investments in children's and families' book stock have been reflected in higher areas of performance. It is also worth noting that the SIPFA methodology is in some ways slightly outdated and doesn't necessarily reflect the changing landscape of the library service. Just turn our attention then finally to the the latest position, and this is the period from April to November last year, 2020. As noted in the report, the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic has been considerable, and comparison with previous year's figures should be taken with a little care. However, it is also a useful way of noting the impact that the pandemic is actually having on services. The most obvious of these includes the lack of physical attendances at heritage sites and libraries, where access has been variable throughout the majority of 2020. Considerable effort has been undertaken in heritage services for alternate arrangements and engagements, and paragraph 26 of the report highlights examples of these. The restrictions on library services means visits and issues are significantly down on the previous year. However, the number of e-loans was more than double that of the same period last year, as one would possibly expect with the situation we're in. Turning our attention then to adult social care, there are certain national metrics where performance has also been affected by COVID-19, and others show less, if any, impact. One area of high performance already mentioned from last year is the proportion of people requiring no ongoing services following reablement. This has since fallen to 80% between April and November 2020, due in part to lower numbers of people with higher needs following hospital discharge. Another area of performance where activity has been somewhat impacted by COVID-19 is the number of people aged 65 or over placed into permanent care. There were few admissions through the first wave of the pandemic last spring, although a rise has since taken place through the autumn. Considering the actual targets for these, for those of working age, the forecast is to be well within the maximum target of 33 admissions, whilst for those aged 65 or over, it is the final full year figure will be somewhere close to the target of around 800 admissions. So to conclude, comparative performance in 2019-20 was good, with supporting people's independence and particular strong area. As noted, feedback via the survey continues to be a challenge and will start to be collated through ongoing reviews. It's a mixed picture for the current year, as can be expected, and ongoing monitoring continues for all metrics. Thank you, Chair. Welcome any questions or comments from members of the committee.
Thanks, Matt. At the moment, I have stunned silence. I've not got a single hand up. So clearly, you've clearly the best presenter of the day that you everybody into submission. I think, being serious, I mean, we always welcome the regular updates we get on performance, and that give us something to look at. And I think, by and large, I think it shows that the committee are happy with the performance, particularly and in spite of the pandemic we're finding ourselves in. So I think we've seen some different figures. You mentioned one of them where on the re-enablement, where we're boosting back to our target by the work we've done, following on from a period of closure, which we very much welcome. So I know committee members have gone through the report and read and digested it, Matt. So a lack of questions isn't any reflection on disinterest. It's just that the information is there, has been presented and understood by committee members, for which we thank you. So that brings us to the end of the reports. We've clearly put down a marker for future scrutiny meetings this week on how to do it in a succinct and timely way. The date of the next committee is scheduled to take place on the 8th of March 2021 at 2 o'clock. Members will recall there were no urgent items that we had to take. Could I thank everybody for attending today's meeting, particularly any members of the public. Can I thank you personally for bearing with me during my early technical issues, which I know affected myself and John Coxon, in that for whatever reason it was telling us we had no microphone attached when we clearly did. So people may think that's a blessing in disguise with me as chairman, but I'm not going to comment any further. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a very pleasant evening, and thank you all.
Good afternoon, everyone.